Greetings, my brothers and sisters. Sending gratitude to all of you who are joining in today to accompany us down the rabbit hole of self-exploration through plant medicines. My name is Ryan Sprague, and I'm here to tell you that your frequency is now set and tuned to explore psychedelic medicines and the impact they've made among the countless psychonauts exploring the last true frontier. Buy a ticket and take the ride with me as we get true first-hand accounts of the experiences, benefits, risks, and transformations taking place within the ever-expanding world of psychedelic medicines on This One Time on Psychedelics. As many of you may be aware, although we can access psychedelic states through connecting with sacred plant medicines, we can also do so by releasing our own endogenous hallucinogenic compounds, such as endogenous DMT. Popular modalities such as breathwork have become well known for being able to allow us to experience this concept. However, one other modality that is not spoken about often with regards to endogenous DMT in psychedelic states is that of float therapy. Today's guest in the show is a master in the realm of float therapy and was called to this realm as his dreams to be the next UFC featherweight were challenged by countless health obstacles. And as such, he originally got into float therapy to help with physical challenges and soon realized that along with providing relief for his physical body, floating was also able to provide mental, emotional, and spiritual support as well. He is the owner of Max Vitality, in which he has brought together his lifelong career in martial arts, his passion for performance coaching, and his expertise in being a medicine man to empower those he serves in being able to take control of their lives and learn to thrive rather than merely survive in their lives. And in today's episode, we will be diving into his journey into these realms, the steady state of DMT that is released and available to us in silent darkness, how the energetic blockages we can illuminate with medicines such as cannabis are affecting our mineral levels, and much, much more. So please, help me in welcoming my man, Max, the shamanic sensei, Casa, to the show. Max, what's up, my brother? So good to have you here.
Pleasure to be here, man. Maybe want to run through a brick wall or something.
Yeah, dude. It's so funny, dude. Reading the intros, I get pumped up for the guest. I'm like, man, I am so fucking excited for this dude. And, it was so cool, man, because when you reached out to me, I took a quick look at your profile and knew right away, just by the shamanic sensei, I was like, I got to have Max on. And so, a great place that I love starting these is, of course, I went through some of this in your intro, but what originally got you into what you're doing right now? Of course, we can dive into a little bit of cannabis and stuff like that, but I'm really interested in this episode. We talk about psychedelics all the time, but I'm interested to talk about what got you into floating, what was the point at which you realized you could experience this endogenous DMT? Take us there first, and then we can expand on that.
Totally, man. Yes, trying to see where to start, but at the root of all of it, I'm a lifelong martial artist. And that's a good place to anchor it in. And my parents got me involved in the martial arts when I was just 4, sort of super young age. And they're hoping at the time that getting me involved in the martial arts would help with the degenerative neuromuscular disease I was diagnosed with at birth called Charcot-Marie-Tooth, or CMT for short. So thankfully it was the martial arts, because it could have been many things like ballet or any of this other stuff, but those against ballet. But thankfully it was the martial arts, and thankfully I stuck with it because it's become a huge part of my life. But as I got older and started teaching and competing more in the martial arts, much like yourself, I was just constantly looking for ways to optimize my mind and body, right? So I tried different technologies, Western world technologies, and shamanic South American brews and Eastern philosophies and just about everything in between. But one day, man, I was coming out of training camp in the middle of a fight camp, and I ended up hitting the dojo for the float center in town in Boston at the time. And even just 7 years ago, man, it was the only float center in all of New England, right? Which is wild to see how it's totally exploded these past 7 years alone. But I remember coming out of that tank after my first float session, Ryan, and I was literally just buzzing with this sensation of relaxation and pure inner peace that I had never experienced before in my entire life, never mind in the middle of fight camp, which were the most stressful things going on in my life at the time. And somewhere in there as well, a few years prior, I had experienced my first trip with psilocybin in ceremony. And for me, when I was in that first session, I kind of had this epiphany moment where I felt my brain waves transition and synchronize into this hyperactive state and hyper-aware state of accelerated consciousness that I had only experienced before using these catalysts of plant medicines. So that kind of totally blew the lid off all this. But ultimately, I ended up becoming so inspired that I floated more, started diving into the research, ended up starting my company, Max Vitality, where we now customize and install float therapy chambers all over the globe.
It's so cool, man. And for everyone listening, me and Max realized that we pretty much grew up an hour away from each other. Max grew up in, a town called Wakefield. And so it's so funny, man. Like, the world is so small, and I recognize that, right? Like when you reached out to me, I had no idea where you were from. And it's one of the first questions I always ask people because I'm so curious. I love traveling and I love checking out places. And now I think you're in Oahu, right?
Yeah, totally. We moved down about 6 months back, but before that, we were right next to each other, man.
Dude, so funny, dude. And actually, it's funny, not to get in a side tangent, but my listeners know I love side tangents. And so my girlfriend's actually hosting a retreat in Hawaii. I'm not exactly sure what island, but I was planning to go out and meet her. So now I have an even better reason to go out there and meet her. So it's amazing, dude.
Let's go, man. Yeah, we got a yurt waiting out back on the farm for you.
Hell yeah, dude. Hell yeah.
Yeah, dude, find out, let me know.
Yeah, hell yeah. And
sure.
So it's so cool, man, because one of the things I'm big on in this podcast is stating that, psychedelics are not for everyone and that you don't need psychedelics to access these states, right? And so one of the many reasons I'm so excited to have you on is because a lot of the time people hear me say that, but to have someone on that can speak to that if someone listening is like, I don't know if psychedelics are right for me, but it sounds like something I'd like to experience. Well, hey, there are things like breathwork, but there are also things that can dive you even deeper, like floating. And so I'm curious for you, you said you felt your brainwaves harmonize, and I'm curious to dive a little bit deeper into that. So like when you continued floating, how synonymous did it feel with the psychedelic state you experienced in, say, psilocybin or any of the other psychedelics you had felt? Like now that you're much more experienced in this, you've been doing it for 7 years, what have you kind of come to realize over those 7 years with regards to psychedelics and this synonymization between floating and psychedelics?
They're incredibly similar. Super similar. It's just different medicines. So I know you're friends with Aubrey Marcus as well, and he just came out with an incredible documentary, if anyone hasn't listened to it, on the medicine that is silent darkness. He spent many days in a silent dark cave or cabin, but for us, we can tap into that silent dark medicine in other ways. And they've been doing this indigenously and ancestrally for thousands of years. It's a very powerful medicine, but a lot of people don't recognize we're constantly being bombarded by two extreme stressors, right? And two of these strongest stressors to our nervous system are the fact that our brains and our subconscious is constantly having to process over 10 million bits of sensory overstimulation every single second of the day, right? And you stack that with another immense stressor, which is, it's not even commonly looked at as a stressor, but it is the gravitational stress that is constantly yanking on our systems. And we're able to transition away from these and escape these inside the float tank. This is like the most pristine environment it's one of the first times used in entire life. We're not being bombarded by overstimulation from the external world. And we're not being ripped down by the force of gravity, because as we'll get into, we're laying in a zero gravity solution. So for me, what I saw, kind of the transition I saw was this was kind of the perfect state to transition my nervous system into this deep parasympathetic state, while at the same time skyrocketing my levels of interoceptive internal awareness, because now my energy, my consciousness wasn't being pulled into the external world, and I could focus that on, say, the inner workings of my heart or my breathing or my digestion, or if I had an injury, bring that energy and awareness down to that certain injury and kind of breathing in through that. But a really powerful medicine, and maybe not at first. My first session, maybe it was kind of learning the environment. My second session, I kind of had this pop where I felt my brainwaves transition into a similar state, kind of like a low dose, even a microdose of something like psilocybin, where I felt that harmonization. But as I took that practice deeper and was able to surrender more and open up my heart more and really explore it all, now we can get in there and with the help of breathwork and other things, tap into some higher levels there that some of the more powerful medicines may bring us.
Yeah, it's so cool because one thing that I've really recognized over the last, I'd say, year or so is that for most of us, when we're actually feeling tired, it's not that we're actually tired, it's that we're actually downregulated, and that we're so used to being so sympathetically upregulated, especially living in somewhere like Boston or any big city. We don't even really know what our energy levels feel like naturally. And so that was one of the big aha moments for me, is realizing that in a psychedelic state, in a very calm meditative state, like I'm not actually tired. I'm actually very in tune, and I'm actually very aware and very downregulated. And so that's a really cool thing you brought up there, because I feel for a lot of people listening, if you're like me, you probably don't even recognize when you're actually tired. There's actually just this feeling of peace within you that's actually like a downregulation of your nervous system. And so I think that's one of the biggest, like, not misnomers, but kind of confusing points living in today's world with social media and all these things that keep us so upregulated, is we're not even sure what it feels like to not be upregulated. And that can definitely bring about some confusion in my experience.
Totally. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because so many people are operating and living day-to-day life with these low levels, or for many people, high levels of state anxiety. And they don't really truly know what that baseline really truly feels like until they can drop into that with the help of practices like floatation therapy or breathwork, and really disconnecting from all the world's stressors. But yeah, for anyone that isn't interested, I could even break down what float therapy is, if that helps, and give a little background so we can dive deep into everywhere we want to take it.
Yeah, please, man, go for it.
Yeah. So for anyone that isn't aware, but floatation therapy, floating sensory deprivation, is a powerful healing tool that's totally taken the world, especially the West Coast in Europe, by storm these past 10 to 20 years. But ultimately, floating involves getting in a big egg-shaped hot tub type tank, oftentimes, usually with the lid over the top, about the size of a small car. And inside this tank is the most unique healing environment on the face of planet Earth, hands down, in my opinion. Because inside this tank, you'll find about a foot of water, but this foot of water is super saturated with over 1,000 pounds of magnesium salts, typically Epsom salts. And the health benefits of Epsom salts alone have been well known and well documented for hundreds, even thousands of years at this point. But the cool thing about it is it creates an extremely buoyant saltwater solution. And so buoyant that I could literally, Ryan, take a bowling ball, put it in the water, and it would float to the top like a cork, right? So it enables effortless floating. I think a lot of people don't recognize how easy and effortless it is to float in these things. But it's not just the 1,000 pounds of salt that makes it so unique, because inside the chamber itself, it's actually totally void of all external sensory information at all. Meaning that in a properly calibrated flotation environment, not even a single photon of light is entering the user's experience at all. There's no sensation of sound, because not only is the chamber itself sound resistant, but the user is also wearing earplugs. There's no smells, there's no taste, there's no movement, there's no speech, and even the sensation of touch is totally nulled out, because the saltwater solution and the air inside the chamber is precisely heated and kept at a constant 94.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And what's so magical about 94.5 is the exact same temperature as the external layer of your skin or your epidermis. So usually, right, within like 30 minutes of entering one of these tanks, the user's brain totally loses awareness and sensation of where their body ends and where the water begins, which can lead to profound spiritual, often life-changing experiences. But ultimately, floating is easy, just getting inside the tank, laying back and floating.
You know, that's so cool, man. And it's actually funny because I've had some experiences that are same, but definitely different with deep meditative practices where, you know, even when I'm going to bed some nights, if I'm really tuned in, all of a sudden I will know that I'm conscious, but I won't have a body, it feels like. And then it will be like a microsecond where all of a sudden I go, oh my God, what happened? And then boom, I click back into my body. But I can imagine where that goes, because I've done it in deeper meditative states and especially psychedelic states. You know, if you don't have that awareness of like, oh, there's my body, and you can find it because you're laying in a bed or something where you can feel all those senses and things like that. But it's really interesting because one thing I'm curious on, and I've been diving into in this psychic training program I've been in, is these clairsenses, right? Clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, claircognizance, you know, all these things. Have you, you know, I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but have you experienced a deeper connection of those types of senses when your other five senses are turned off? Because the way I see it is that our five senses are the ones that connect us to the physical plane of reality. But yet these clairsenses are almost above that, or maybe like beneath that, or I don't exactly know how to look at it. But what I've noticed is that when my senses are calmed down, my five physical senses, that's when those senses click in. And so when I'm doing this training and when I'm teaching others, what I'm having them do is actually down regulate themselves to a point where they're almost asleep, and then boom, they're clicking into the psychic state. As you get better at it, you can get a little more awake when you do it. But, that's the general practice. So I'm curious if you've had any experience with that.
Yeah, plethora of them. I'm really glad you're diving deeper and exploring those classes. Yeah, so my partner and I, my girlfriend, we've been hosting shamanic ceremonies for much like yourself, but many years as well. And this is something we work on deeply, is kind of unlocking these clairsentiences, as you call them. So for me, one thing I noticed, and one thing we see with the silent darkness in particular, is so me, for example, I'm extremely clairvoyant, right? But my partner, she feels way more intensely than I do, right? And I'm not saying one's better than the other. It's about creating harmony and using it as a tool and deepening that relationship with those senses that you have. But for her, what we uncovered was that the reason that her third eye and her energy center up there, her energy zone, was deficient in energy or had a little blockage was due to a subconscious fear that she had instilled with her and that she learned at a very young age, because maybe she watched a lot of scary movies. And now as a little girl, she's sitting in her basement, she just sees faces popping out everywhere, right? And it's almost as if at a very young age, she was extremely clairvoyant, but ended up out of fear, oftentimes, pulling their consciousness away from that system. Right. I lost you on video for a moment, so I want to make sure.
Oh, yeah. No, we're good. Yep, we're good.
You good though?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I just want to make sure. Yeah. I'll pick up there. So again, as a result of this subconscious fear that she established at a very young age, she ended up pulling her consciousness away from her third eye center. And as a result, she isn't able to see these visionary experiences that maybe someone else may in the silent darkness or in a psychedelic ceremony. So when we're working with a patient like this, our process is about helping bring their awareness back to that energy center, that love and that compassion, and clearing it out and bring their energy and awareness back up to it. And as we do that, we can start to activate it. And what we see with her now is that when she goes into the floats, that was a really powerful tool for her, because she was able to release some of the fear she had around the silent darkness, around the darkness. And the more she sat in the darkness, the more she was able to let go of that fear, release those parts of her, heal those parts of her, and now bring that energy back up to her third eye and tap into these visionary experiences that she may have been blocked off from before.
That is so cool, man. And what I've realized is that very similar to if we're playing a video game and we're starting the game and maybe we have like a Need for Speed type game, right? So you're starting your car, you're building it, and you have these certain amount of points that you can put on traction or speed or handling or acceleration or any of these things. And so you can choose to stack it all on acceleration at the cost of not having any handling or XYZ, right? Well, this is kind of how the clairsenses work from what I've realized, is that a lot of us, like for you have a lot of points in your clairvoyance, and you've been getting into like more clairsentience, what your partner has, that deep feeling, that intuitive feeling. For me, what I realized was that originally I was really high at claircognizance, right? So intuitive knowings, but I was kind of deficient in the other ones. And so working with Krishanti, the person I've been working with, she's taught me that, yes, having one is great, but when they all work together, they are so much more powerful, and you'll know when they all work together, because you'll get a feeling that tells you something that allows you to see something all within a fraction of a second. They all happen at the same time. And it's just this like ability to really like take back our power, because at the end of the day, like these senses are so valuable, because if someone goes, Max, trust me, and you go, I don't know if I should trust this person, right? Like that's your clairsentience tapping in, right? Like there are these feelings that allow us to be able to distinguish between good and evil in this realm. Because I think that, going down a rabbit hole, I've been in the modern mystery school for quite some time now. And one of the things that is part of their creation story is the fact that we are all here as gods in training to remember that we are God. And in order to do that, we need to be able to distinguish between good and evil. So therefore we need a soul, and we need emotions, and we need senses, and we need all these things. So this is like literally our training ground for being able to distinguish between good and evil. And so the correlation between being able to tap into these clairsenses through float therapy and other modalities like this, and then being able to more accurately distinguish between good and evil, and therefore recognize yourself as God, And therefore, I mean, like the ability of that allows you to be God while still being a human at the same time. And I was talking to this guy, Drew Banky, the other day, who he says that, he's an ayahuasquero and a really cool guy. And he was saying that when he's connected with Source deep in ayahuasca ceremonies, and the first time that he really had a true full-on ego death, he said that when he met Source pretty much told him, like, hey, my thing right now is I've had so many experiences trying to figure myself out and, essentially being Max or Ryan. Now what I'm really looking for is for Max and Ryan to remember their God and yet still be Max and Ryan. So still have this illusion of separation, but remember essentially like before you were Men in Black, to put it that way, And so it's really interesting to tap into these things because whether through psychedelics or through things that invoke psychedelic states naturally, such as flow therapy, I really feel this is one of the things that is crucial to us being able to have the better world that we all envision and that we're all looking to manifest right now as, spiritual people, as people that are in self-development, as people that are coaches. This is what we want for everyone else in the world. And to be able to do this without any psychedelics added is so incredible because, let's face it, psychedelics just aren't for everyone.
Totally. Yeah. And, and that's something I realized pretty early on in my float journey as well. For one, beautifully said. And I totally agree. And there's so many aspects of the float medicine that are so profound and powerful. And like you said, in helping us reconnect with our inner being and that ideal vision of the future that we're looking to bring forth into this physical world. So I feel there's so many benefits of floating, but really the three main benefits I like to touch on are all of the benefits that are associated with the zero gravity environment of floating, right? Because it's totally unlike laying on a mattress at the end of the night where there's thousands of springs and pain points cutting off your microcirculation, right? So when we enter a true zero gravity environment, our blood vasculature can totally relax and our capillaries can totally vasodilate. So as a result, we see a huge increase in surge in things like oxygen flow and blood flow and microcirculation to virtually every part of the body, which is incredibly healing for thousands of ailments, right? And we can, and on top of that, the sensory deprivation aspect, the second pillar, where it's really the first time in the user's entire life we're not being bombarded with all this sensory overstimulation, especially so many of the highly conscious people that are listening to a podcast like this. Many of them are empathic. Many of them are extremely sensitive and hyper aware, right? So when we're constantly hyper aware and all of our energy is being drawn into the external world and all these people and these situations and events, well, we can cut that all out. And like you mentioned earlier, take that power back and bring that awareness and that consciousness back into us and our beings and our heart and our soul. We can really connect with ourself on a deep level, connect to the divine on a much deeper level as well. And then the third main pillar is the fact that while you're soaking in the zero gravity solution, as you're in this sensory deprived environment, you're also soaking up magnesium transdermally through the hair follicles of your skin during the entirety of every single float session. And I'm sure you're super well versed on magnesium. We could dive into that if you'd like, but magnesium is the fourth most abundant mineral in the human body, and over 95% of Westerners are extremely deficient. So we can also soak up some magnesium during it, which is also extremely healing for many, many ailments as well.
Yeah. It's so cool because, I know you living on the farm, right? Like, farming and, cultivating cannabis and also growing all my own vegetables and fruits and things like that is so big to me. But the thing is that most of our topsoils are so depleted that then the animals that eat those plants or the humans that eat them, and then the humans that therefore eat those animals, like we're all just depleted. And so being able to have that added bonus of being able to tap into magnesium, which is so crucial to so many processes in our body, is really the icing on the cake, and I think that's so powerful to focus on because even with psychedelics, if you're deficient in things like magnesium and then you're interacting with psychedelics, they're not going to be able to work perfectly and cohesively through your body. Because essentially it's the same thing as like, if you don't have a strong foundation and then you try to build a house on that, well, you can build the sweetest house ever, but it's going to fall with the first, rainstorm or storm or earthquake or anything like that because it wasn't built on a strong foundation. And so I see a direct link between being able to have more magnesium in your body and then also being able to either have better float sessions as a result or even better psychedelic experiences as a result as well. Hey, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show. I wanted to take a quick moment to let you all know that the doors are officially open for the Conscious Cannabis Collective. And as such, this is the last week you can sign up and receive all of the bonuses we're currently including. This is the last time I will be personally onboarding those of you who sign up with a complimentary one-on-one session, and you'll have the ability to get the Grow with Cannabis course for free during this limited time. For more info on how you can take advantage of this offer, head down to the show notes for this episode and secure your spot today, as we only have so many spots left and they are filling up quickly. Now back to the show.
Big time, man. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. And it's a big part of my philosophy too, that the minerals are the backbone of not just our hormonal health, but our mental and emotional health as well. And since our mental and emotional health is directly correlated with the reality that we're creating or bringing towards us, this is very important.
Yeah.
So it's all intimately tied together, this feedback loop. So, and another big part of my philosophy as well is there's so many people, again, listening to this podcast that are working consciously with these different plant medicines, which is beautiful. We love to see more people. And I love that you're spearheading that as well, but consciously leveraging these beautiful medicines that have been gifted to us. But on the other hand of that, yes, there's so many heightened states of consciousness and awareness that can be tapped into, and so many beautiful insights and downloads and high vibrations. But on the other side of that, we have to also be part of working with it consciously is recognizing that how it's impacting our body and our being in other ways as well. And one of those big pieces, how it's impacting our mineral levels. This is across the board with all medicines, all plant medicines, cannabis in particular. But for one, the dopamine that's released when we are in ceremony with cannabis or using it consciously is a potassium dependent process, right? And magnesium and potassium is a very important mineral, and magnesium regulates our potassium levels in the body as well. So we're depleting our potassium, we're therefore depleting our magnesium. And the issue is, again, almost everyone's already magnesium depleted. On top of this, the shadow work that we're doing in these ceremonies, in these waves of stressful emotions that may come up, these traumas we may be reliving, or maybe even for some of us living for the first time, are also stressors. And these stressors are also can be zapping our mineral levels, in particular our magnesium. So again, if we are looking to fully integrate a collective process of working with this plant as consciously as possible, it's important that we're giving our body the minerals that it needs to facilitate and downregulate and come back to a baseline after facing these immense stressors.
Absolutely. I think it's so powerful that you brought that up, because I saw Sherveen talking about something similar the other day with cannabis. I find aside from any other plant medicines, is the one that people fall into the most likelihood of overusing. And it's, again, we're all interacting with this plant, and a lot of us are, and we love it. We hold it in very high regard, but we never got a user manual for it. Right. And so we're just figuring things out as we're going. The research has been, thwarted for so long, except in Israel. So it's just starting to really come out about a lot of these things. But I think what Sherveen was saying was very similar too, because, what you're saying is that, hey, we're depleting minerals by interacting with cannabis too often. And what he was saying is another level to that too, which is that by interacting with cannabis too often, we're almost blowing holes in our biofield and our aura as a result. And, what he was saying too, is it's not like if you're using cannabis even once a day that this is going to directly happen. It's more so the people that are using cannabis all day long, every day. And what I find, with people I'm working with cannabis is that the people that are normally using cannabis all day, every day are the people that are still don't have their 4 doctors in alignment. They don't have their 6 foundation principles. I've rarely met someone who's using cannabis all day that is exercising, eating all the right food, etc. So these things compound on one another. So you're figuring that a lot of these people that are in this pattern, maybe they're in that pattern because cannabis is giving them this perceived sense of comfort. But in reality, it's actually just a lack of minerals they're feeling in their body, and maybe there are holes in their biofield and aura, as a result of overusing it. And so this is kind of where dependency happens, right? You need this thing to feel better because you've learned that it helps you feel better, but it only helps you feel better because you're starting from a state of lack from overusing it. And so it's kind of a paradox in a way, but I'm so glad you brought that up, man, because it's hot on my mind.
Totally. Yeah, I believe I saw that clip of Shervine too. And we can even take it one layer deeper than that. Is I feel passionately about this topic. And we're constantly working on these shadow work aspects, especially in different plant medicine ceremonies, whether it's breath work or whatever it is. But what happens as a result is these energetic blockages that are coming up in these shadow work ceremonies. Maybe these traumas that ended up becoming energetic blockages in our system. But these energetic blockages are being transmitted into our physical body, right? So the energetic blockages are being transmitted into our physical body by their zapping and depletion and dysregulation of our mineral levels. And when our minerals are dysregulated as a result of our energetic field being dysregulated, then we start seeing dis-ease and disharmony in the physical body and the physical being as a result. So I feel that is an intimate link there between the shadow work that we're performing and how it's being transmitted to the physical body. And I feel passionately that the connection there is its impact or dysregulation of the mineral levels.
Yeah, it makes so much sense to me intuitively. And I think that this is one of the challenges when anything, I talk about the psychedelics a lot, but really it's happening still with shadow work, with breath work, with any of these things where it's almost like, just do it all the time, right? Like, what's the worst that could happen? Usually you don't see that with psychedelics as much, but definitely with breath work, and definitely with shadow work and these kind of things, they're almost perceived and put out there as like, especially for men, like, you need to do this to be the man that you're meant to be. But it's only half the story. It's like, make sure that you're actually replenishing yourself after. It's kind of like, we all know this with a hard workout. You don't do a hard workout and not eat all day or eat garbage after, right? You know that you need to replenish your system. But I think that as a society, and maybe just in the Western world, I'm not sure if it translates to the whole world, but we've yet to really integrate that same type of philosophy onto things like breath work and shadow work and these other types of modalities that a lot of us are doing because we have the best of intentions to be able to heal ourselves, to be the best people we can be, to be, cordial with other human beings, to be able to come forth with authenticity and honesty and radical ownership. But at the same time, a lot of us are ended up depleting ourselves by doing those things. And so it's really a catch-22 in a lot of ways.
Totally, man. Totally. Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. And like you said, I think the key is just being aware of that aspect and not neglecting it, like not working out all day and not eating food. But if we are maybe going to sit in a medicine ceremony or leverage or sit with cannabis consciously, maybe just pairing it with some extra magnesium pre or post, maybe an adrenal cocktail, which we can get into a simple recipe people can use at home to balance all of our mineral levels, all of our macro minerals in one felt swoop. For me, I love using it, either pairing it with floats, and floats are a great supplement here because a float pre-medicine ceremony, every time I sit with any powerful plant medicine and I plan on going really, really deep, I always use a float pre-ceremony. And I do this to set my intention before, really get extra crystal clear what my intention is going into that ceremony. What is it? To open up my heart? Is it to let go of some different fears? Is it to get more insights on the specific topic or bring my awareness somewhere, get clarity on something? Whatever it is, getting clear on that in the float session ahead of time, disconnecting from all the external stimulation, connecting with my inner being and the divine, and getting clear on that in that float session. Then when I sit with that medicine ceremony, the day after, doing another float. And now I can help with that with the integration post-medicine ceremony. And again, sitting with my inner being again and getting crystal clear on what I need to do or want to do to integrate this medicine ceremony optimally and effectively. So really stacking the floats there. If anyone's at home and they don't have a float tank sitting in their living room to use after they have their cannabis sesh, even just a simple foot soak. When I'm there and I'm soaking my feet in these mineral-rich foot soaks, which we can get into later on, we're soaking up the magnesium and other minerals transdermally, which is right away, which is far superior to oral supplementation, because oral supplementation often takes 9 to 12 months to have any impact if we're taking magnesium oral supplementation. But the research is out. Like when I talk to Dr. Mercola, he's crystal clear. He isn't able to really start moving the dial on his red blood cell magnesium levels. It's the most accurate magnesium blood test that we have to date. We can get it for like $40 on requestatest.com. I'm sure we can put the link below and see how these people's mineral levels are doing. But he wasn't able to really start moving the dial on that until he started introducing transdermal forms for him. That's with the float tank in his house. But really, really interesting, just being conscious of it.
Yeah, and what I love about your pre and post float type ceremonies before, or rather your pre and post float sessions before these ceremonies, that was a tongue twister, is that, what I find a lot is that a lot of people want to interact with medicines, but they have yet to subtract from the equation of themselves before and after to actually allow the plants space to work within them. And so it's almost like too many cars in a traffic jam, right? Like, a lot of people think, oh, if I'm stuck in stinking thinking, what will get me out of this? I better think my way out of it, right? And that's just like not what's actually going to help you through it. You actually need to subtract. It's almost like if you realize something is not working, do you keep doing it, or do you stop and go back to the drawing board and have time to contemplate on why it didn't work and maybe what could work in its place? So I find that's the mistake a lot of people make, especially with cannabis, because at least with psilocybin, ayahuasca, like there are a little more teachings out about the sacredness of them and a little bit more research out right now. But cannabis, being the most widely used plant medicine and the most popular, but also the most misunderstood, is kind of like seen as this thing of like, oh, I don't really need to do anything for that. Even ceremony with cannabis is something, a shocker for a lot of people. And that's why I started Connect with Cannabis, because what I find is that it really is the people's plant, right? Like, it's the only plant that you can interact with. And if something does come up, you're able to integrate it on the go. It's really hard to do that when you're 5 grams deep on a psilocybin journey, to take out your phone and actually put on there, sign up for this art class, or reach out to this person that, I've been getting the call for, right? But with cannabis, you can do that and then go right back into your ceremony and have very little consequences as a result, right? In terms of like, messing up the ceremony or getting out of the flow or anything. So I find that, this information is really, really powerful, because I think that most people would do this if they knew about it. They're just not aware of it. And so I think this is how we start the change. We bring awareness to these things. And from awareness, we can then actually start to make changes that change our lives.
Totally, man. Yeah. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And yeah, I know even Paul Chek, I believe I've heard him say before that he recommends before anyone goes into a medicine ceremony and sits with a heavy duty psychedelic, that he recommends that they at least experience a float in sensory deprivation first. I'm not saying this is everyone's journey or everyone's path, but definitely something that may help some of these people, maybe people that are listening that are looking to get into the psychedelics, some of the heavier ones as well. Maybe experiencing a float in sensory deprivation first and connect with yourself that way may be a cool step before you hop right in. It'd be really great.
It's very sound advice, and I think that one of the things I'd love to dive in with you, man, because I've got to ask, right? We've heard about Rogan saying, oh, I take edibles and go in the float tank. I'm curious if you've ever experimented with either cannabis or any other psychedelic in the float tank, because I think this is something that me personally, I am super excited to dive into. So I'm curious if you've had experiences with that, and if so, what they've been, and then we can get into like what your tips are and things like that afterwards.
Totally. Yeah. I'm an experimenter, much like yourself. And I was also very excited to start intertwining them. So I've experienced smoking cannabis before, or edible cannabis before, which is something I preferred because I was still able to really connect to my breath on a deep level. And since we're in the salty environment as well, you don't want your lungs to be too congested or any phlegm or mucus in there. So I gravitated towards the edible cannabis for sure. But honestly, man, for me, I feel when I'm working with clients and they're looking to incorporate floating into their lifestyle, right? A lot of people ask, what are your thoughts? Should I burn before? Should I down a couple brownies before? Whatever it is, much like yourself, much like you'd recommend with cannabis, using it consciously and connecting with that medicine alone first, right? If someone comes and asks you, hey, if you're coaching them on getting into cannabis and they ask if they should have some mushrooms the first time they burn, probably not the wise, probably not the wisest idea. But yeah, so I feel for me, the silent darkness is such a powerful and intimate medicine by itself first. So if we can experience and explore how deep we can possibly take that practice first, consciously, and learn that medicine as thoroughly as we possibly can, and then we start leveraging maybe some accelerated consciousness tools or some consciousness narrowing herbs like cannabis and bring it into the float tank as well, we can really start exploring on a deeper level. But for many people, I think the cool thing about floating is we can actually access many of these same states without the need for this catalyst. And that's why I feel it's so appealing. So maybe if we're working with some patients that aren't able to burn for some sort of reason, or it's not wise for them to smoke, or they don't do well with edible cannabis, I feel the float tank is a cool step in there that we can start introducing them to, because we can really start accessing similar states of heightened awareness and consciousness in the silent darkness.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. And, I tell everyone that comes into the program, they're like, all right, so should I use a bong, a joint? What should I do? And I'm like, listen, honestly, you want minimum effective dose, right? Like interacting with cannabis in a ceremonial way, in a conscious way, is not about getting blasted, right? If you have cancer or something and you need to interact with RSO or FECO or something like that, there's an argument for getting a very, very blasted. But in the sense of being able to do medicine work, you don't really need to go that far, especially with cannabis, to be able to get a very powerful result. And so I think that like looking at everything as minimum effective dosing is not only the conscious way to look at things, but it's the way that's going to allow you to actually commune with the plant in a respectable and in a more like consistent way. And by consistent, I don't mean every day, but like if you end up interacting with cannabis or anything in the plant medicine realm so much that you either get traumatized, right, by going too far, too fast, or you end up becoming dependent. And by dependent, I don't mean on the plant, but on the feelings of comfort that the plant or any of these plants can bring forth, then you end up damaging the relationship and you have to take the break and things like that. And so for me, I've gone through that. And so I'm hoping, it might be some people, it might be a part of some people's karmic path, but my hope is that by sharing these things, people do not make the same mistakes that I made getting into it and just not knowing, right? Like, again, there's no user manual for this plant. And that's the great thing, again, about floating, is that you're not messing with your consciousness with the plant. And so therefore, it's much easier to kind of test the boundaries of like, well, how long can I float? Can I do it for longer? Can I go into the fasted state and see what that does, or any of these things? And then when you feel really confident, try microdosing something like cannabis and try how that works. Because I think a lot of people will just go in too fast, and they'll go too far, too fast, and they'll end up getting really paranoid or scared. And that just won't, that will end up not having floating or cannabis be a positive experience. And that doesn't do anyone good,
Extremely well said. I love it. I love it. Yeah, man. And even my experience as well is I had an experience with psilocybin before being introduced to floating. And I feel floating for me was so divinely, just came to me on my path so divinely at the perfect time, as everything always does, where I had a sit with psilocybin and my life totally did a 180, right? My awareness, and I saw a perspective in different planes of consciousness I would have never even believed existed previously, or I wouldn't have seen the desire to go and just watch my mind go. And as I sit in meditation for 20 minutes, I would have said, why, but for me, it was the first time. I'm not saying someone's going to go in there and have a full blown ayahuasca experience their first float, maybe for some people. And this is why I always recommend floating 3 times in a short period of time if it's your first time floating. So maybe 3 times in the first 3 or 4 weeks, because maybe that first session you're just going in and kind of learning the new environment, right? It's dark silence. So you're breaking through all these walls of expectation that we have of it just going in and getting psychedelic right off the bat. It's a dark, silent room and you're laying there and it's quiet and pitch black, right? So we're in that, we can learn that environment, and maybe it takes 50 of the first 60 minutes to fully relax and surrender into that environment. But the second time you go back for your second session, you're able to relax in 30 minutes. In your third session, you're able to relax in 10, and now you're able to reap more and more benefits of the silent darkness and really surrender to the whole medicine that it is. What I realized after about my third or fourth session, I was able to tap into this state that for me, I'd only experienced before on a microdose of psilocybin. Where I felt this hypersynchrony between my hemispheres and my brain. And then as I went deeper and deeper and started floating more and more, dozens of floats later, it started getting more and more profound. And now as I learned to work with that medicine, surrender to it more deeply, open up my heart on a different level, my whole experience of all of those sentences that we've talked about has begun to expand in an incredible way, which has been beautiful.
Yeah, and that's something I'd love to dive into is like, for me, and I imagine some people listening, right? Like, before I started meditating, before I started doing breath work, you know, it sounded interesting to me, but I didn't know like what the positive results would be. Like, how is doing breath work going to lead to me having a higher quality life? And so like you were just speaking to like kind of like the forward of that, right? Like being able to have the direct experience of, you know, your clairsenses, right? Being able to have the experience of brainwave harmonization. But like, how is that translated for you into your life, right? Like with your partner, in your business? Like, this is something I love diving into, because I feel that's for a lot of people what can get them like really like, okay, that relates to me. Now I'm really in it. Like now I'm sold, right? And so, you know, I'm really excited for you to like tell us like what has transpired in your life since floating that has been some of the biggest results you've experienced as a result.
Totally. Great question. Gotta love it. Yeah. So for me, dude, I feel, for one, it's allowed me and enabled me to tap into this baseline, or drop into this baseline of stillness and inner peace that I hadn't experienced before pre-floating, right? While at the same time accelerating that introspective awareness, so I could be more mindful of my breath and my heart in a way that I wasn't as acutely aware of previously. A big one for me is, again, even just dropping into that baseline is profound, because whether it's post-workout, whether it's before a big game, before a podcast, being able to drop into that, maybe I get in an argument with my partner, or my daughter starts ripping the room apart, or whatever it is, and we start feeling some emotions of stress and frustration start to bubble to the surface. If I can just go to the float tank and let go of all of that, and really just work on peeling off all these layers of the onion, letting them all go, open up my heart again, and whatever the intention for that float is, again, just like if we're working with a power plant like Cannabis, setting the intention before is so profound, but setting the intention pre-float based on whatever you're looking to get out of it is also profound. But one for me that may be worth sharing that came up recently, as I touched on at the beginning of the episode, that degenerative neuromuscular disease I was diagnosed with at birth called CMT. And originally my whole life, man, I had followed the Western model of kind of the programming of, this is what it is, this genetic thing. And I'm not to say that genetics doesn't play a role, but to see the role that I was playing behind all of it, right? And how I was actually exacerbating the symptoms here, and the probability that I would have had something like CMT at birth. And they'll say it's uncurable, it's irreversible, all these things they love to throw out. There's no pharmaceuticals for it. There's nothing. But in the float tank, man, this is a pretty cool one. And I was in the float tank, and I was just watching my thoughts go by, right? Totally detaching from them, just observing them. Sometimes it's a practice I'll do where I'll actually just let my mind totally run rampant, kind of like a dog letting it off the leash, and totally letting it let all of its energy out, explore the places it wanted to explore. And then after like 30 minutes, just settles down and sits, you know. It's a cool practice. But I was doing this in the float tank, and I watched and witnessed a thought of judgment swing by, right? And at the same exact instant that this judgmental thought passed my mind, there was a slight attachment with it, naturally. But what I witnessed in my body happen the exact moment that thought transpired was profound. And what I noticed was that my lower legs, my calf muscles, and my hands, right, started to tense up a little bit as I was holding this energy in these muscle groups, right? And as a result, this done over time and over time, we start pulling our consciousness and our awareness and holding this excess energy in our extremities. And typically with someone like CMT, like myself at least, it was because my heart was so open. I had so much love I was looking to give to the world, right? But I didn't have the outlets. And at the same time, I had all this love I wanted to give to the world, but it was masked by this overarching judge that was so extremely harsh. And this judge, as we say, that I know Aubrey Marcus has said so divinely, that the inner judge in our mind is just a little bit harsher than our harshest judge and our harshest critic in the outside world, which is oftentimes our parents. That's the aspect that's genetic. That's the part that transcends generations, is the aspect where this judge judging our kids, this way of parenting, the style of parenting, at least in my family tree, as I look back, this is something that's profound. And this judge establishes such a strong critic in the person with CMT's psyche that now they have such a strong judge, and so they have such an open heart that whenever they go to love something, they start judging it or holding it back a little bit, and start holding that excess energy in their extremities. So with anyone, maybe someone knows someone with CMT, listens to this podcast or a similar ailment, the anecdote has become opening up my heart fully, doing the shadow work with power plants like cannabis to connect with that inner judge and do the shadow work of how we can relax this judge a little bit and start healing it with compassion and unconditional love, while at the same time pairing it with the outlets to let this excess energy flow, whether it's breath work, whether it's more hugs, whether it's martial arts, letting those hands fly, whatever it is, man, but getting that excess energy out, calming the judge. And I've been able to see profound differences, leaps and bounds in the decrease in symptoms of CMT that I've experienced these past few years as a result of that process.
Wow. That is amazing, man. And that's exactly like, it's so funny you mentioned that, because I think for a lot of people, they go around unaware that this judge is there. And so simply the awareness that judge exists, then everything on top of that you're able to realize, like, oh, I actually have a say in what this judge actually has an ability to say in me, and how I actually take that and what I do with the information. Do I take it as truth, or do I take it as a curious observation and then laugh at the devil and watch him run away? Because I think that at the end of the day, this judge, like the way that I've often viewed the judge or the inner critic, is almost like a really tough trainer, right? Who's going to call out all your weaknesses, right? And if you're not aware that he or she is trying to help you in some way, shape, or form, then you're just going to be like, wow, I guess I really suck. I guess I'm really the worst fighter in the world. But that trainer actually like wants you to kind of like combat it and be like, no, I'll show you. And so I think in a lot of the ways, like when we really individuate and we get into the seat of the true self, the higher self, whatever you want to call it, soul, heart, etc., we're able to witness that judge, not be encapsulated by it. And as a result, we're able to start telling it like, oh, that's funny you say that. Now let me go show you what I choose to believe about myself. And the more reps you get in on that, whether it's you're going to the gym and you see someone lifting heavier weight and you're like, oh my God. And instead of going to lift the heavier weight, because then you might hurt yourself, going, hey, you know what? What if it's completely okay where I'm at right now? Or in your case, like, what if it's completely okay that I have this, disorder? And what if what the doctors told me isn't inherently objectively true? What if I can decide how much this disorder is going to affect me and what I choose to believe about it, rather than externalize it on what other people have told me about it, that's then reinforcing what this judge is then telling me? And I think it's so cool you talked about kind of the ancestral part of this too. And I don't think I've ever thought of that before, that like the judge is kind of inherited through our ancestry, because what I've noticed is that my father, for instance, was always super positive, and I feel as though I got his judge, because a lot of the times, like, I do feel the judge come up, and sometimes it does get me for sure. But I think that with anything, there's levels to this, right? So like, there's never a point at which you're like, I've conquered it, the judge will never come back. But there is a point where you can go, oh, I've passed that level. Very similar to jiu-jitsu, right? Like you get out of white belt and you're like, oh my God, I know some stuff. And then blue belt, you're like, oh my God, I actually don't know anything again. And every belt system is like that. You get awarded the belt and you're like, oh, I know something now. And you do, right? You do know something, but you start realizing there's a whole nother level of what you don't know. And if you can find the sweet spot in that, instead of focusing on how much you don't know, focusing on like how much you don't know, and it's exciting. Oh my God, I get to learn now. Because I think that for me, what I've realized is that when I'm in my highest flows, when I'm in my highest vibrational states, it's how much mystery in the world is what actually allows me to be joyful. That's what allows me to be excited, is realizing how much I don't know and probably will never know. But I think when I'm in my lowest states, it's when I'm thinking I need to know more than I know in the moment. And I'm thinking that something went wrong. I should know more than I know now. All these coulda, shoulda, wouldas. But I think that being able to have this experience in the float tank where you actually see the judge for what it is, and you're able to put your own story onto it consciously, instead of whatever story has been put on it by, society, whatever story you might have never even known this judge existed before, like whatever you're able to do with it in that float tank is able to actually give you space from it. And from that space, you can create the relationship you want with it. And I think that's really cool.
That is, man. Yeah. No, so well said, man. And like you said, I feel it's the float environment itself is just like almost a perfect environment, at least it was for me and has been for me, at facilitating me being able to recognize that spot within me, the soul, the seat of the heart, whatever you want to call it, like you pointed out, where a deeper aspect of me is living, right? A truer high aspect of me is living, and now can disconnect and kind of watch almost the relationship between these two parts, whether it's the judge, and maybe it's my heart, maybe there's an inner boy in there or an inner child, maybe there's some firefighters in there. But all these different parts of the psyche, we can really watch how they start interacting with each other when we're in a float environment, and we can start kind of hearing them all a little bit more loudly, a little bit more clearly, where they are in our body or their energetic being, or where we hold them. Like the example I gave about with the CMT has been really, really cool, is to get all those insights and all that.
Yeah. This is why I love IFS so much, internal family structure, because this is exactly what it dives into. But the challenge is that, like, a lot of people, they sit there and like, well, I just hear a bunch of voices, or I don't hear any voices, because they're so encapsulated in the voices that they can't have the separation. So the missing component is, well, how do you get still enough to be able to actually decipher the minute differences between each voice, and then be able to, like, be the counselor between them, be the coach between them that goes, okay, you're saying this and you're saying that. Well, actually, you both want the same thing. You're just going at it different ways. Oh, actually, you're both fighting for my best interest. It's just that you're doing it in different ways. So I think that because we live in a society where it's really hard to go meditate on top of a mountain for 20 years and get to this type of stillness, I think floating can be one of the best ways to be able to not only do all the stuff we've talked about, but also be able to get that space that allows you to start actually doing your own inner investigation of what these voices are, who they are, and what they're saying, and be able to remediate them as a result. And Max, I mean, this has been an absolutely amazing podcast, dude. I'm so, like, shocked that an hour has already gone by. I'm so fucking pumped to do round 2 with you, man, because I feel like we just skimmed the surface. But I want to make sure I give you an ample opportunity to tell people where they can find you, where they can find all of your products. Guys, I'm going to be listening to the show notes. Max has got some amazing affiliate deals that you have to check out. That'll all be in the show notes. But man, where can people find you? Where do you have coming up, if anything, you want people to know about? Tell the people where they can find you, man.
Totally. I appreciate you having me, man. It's been such a blast, high vibrational flow we've had, which is great. Yeah, man, I think one thing super exciting we've been working on is not just optimizing the float tank itself, because we work with so many high-level athletes and health and wellness influencers, and biohacking the thing to the brim and totally EMF shielding it and having the powerful underwater sound transducers and all that jazz. But my mind turned recently to optimizing the float tank solution itself, like within the past 5 years or so. And everyone in the industry has been using Epsom salts to fill their float tank, right? What I learned as I was diving down the rabbit hole of magnesium, which may be interesting, is that magnesium chloride actually has over 230% more magnesium than Epsom salts, right? And magnesium is the active ingredient in those Epsom salts, the primary one. So we started exploring filling our float tanks with magnesium chloride, right? And soaking that up. And then magnesium has 3 powerful cofactors, 2 of which can be absorbed transdermally, right? So this could be interesting for everyone at home. Maybe they're leveraging cannabis a good amount and they want to be there to top off their mineral levels. We started mixing in the float tank solution, not just magnesium chloride of the purest source, but also other micro minerals like potassium bicarbonate, which helps get more magnesium into the cell and into the mitochondria, where it can make more ATP energy, right? And then on top of this, boron, which helps get more magnesium into the cell and keep it there longer as well. So we made this power blend. We took all the salts, we infoceuticalized them by blasting with powerful frequencies, heart opening, grounding, all this stuff. And even brought the salt through a ceremonial alchemical process to enhance the healing power of the salt itself, and started filling our float tanks with this. And dude, it's totally next level. When you get out to Hawaii, you'll have to try it out. But what we ended up doing is recognize not everyone's in a position to install a float tank in their apartment or their home or anything like that. But we ended up bagging up this bath blend and bagging it out, putting an affordable price tag on it. Now people at home are using this stuff in foot soaks, the comfort of our own home, because we have the largest pores in our body at the bottom of our feet and the nerve endings to every major organ in the body, says Chinese medicine. So we can soak this up So man, whenever I'm smoking a J, whenever I'm in ceremony, whatever it is, literally I was in a Aya ceremony recently last week, and I had my feet in a foot soak at the same time because that's what my soul is calling for. So I went into the ceremony, had the foot soak next to me and popped my feet in there, man. And it was powerful. It was really, really powerful. Just feeling the minerals and all the energy, the high vibrations get soaked up into my body when it needed them most. It was really, really cool. So we got that bag on there as well with the Vitality salts, foot soaks, mix them in. They're great. Up the mag. And then on top of that, we got our float tanks, our pods, our pools. You guys can find it there at maxvitality.co. So .co. And you can follow my journey at Max Casa, MAXXCASA on Instagram. And dude, it's been a pleasure. Looking forward to connecting with some more of your people and definitely doing it again soon.
Dude, that is amazing, man. And it's so funny, dude. The .co, I have one too. How many people put .com in? It's like an epidemic, I feel like, with me. You know, it's like, make sure you guys know it's .co, just like mine. You know, it's so funny, man. And I got one last question for you, Max, and that is this. If someone listened to this conversation and they got really inspired to interact with psychedelics in their own life, what is the one piece of advice that Max Casa would suggest to them to allow them to use discernment in choosing whether or not psychedelics are right for them in their lives?
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful question. Beautiful question. Yeah, well, I feel disconnecting from all of the external media, all the external voices, all of the hype, and connecting with yourself and your inner being in meditation, whether it's in a float tank, it's getting some times away from the screens, away from some people, and just feeling if that is what their soul is truly calling for, and seeing which part of them is craving that psychedelic experience. Which part in them is craving that psychedelic experience? Is it coming from ego? Is it coming from somewhere else? Is it coming from their heart and their soul because they really, truly feel called to pursue this journey, not just to make their own light shine brighter, but everyone else around them? I feel is a really important piece. And then on top of that, it's making sure we are conscious and aware of our mineral levels as we are doing this. Maybe get an RBC mag test before hopping right in, see where you're at. Because again, if we start interacting with it before our magnesium levels and other minerals are optimal, we may be doing more harm than good. So if we want to get the most out of this sacred relationship, making sure our mineral levels are topped off and introduce the plant medicines, and then you'll be rocking and rolling.
Dude, I love that, man. And it's so perfect and so powerful, man, because, you know, I think this is one of the things that with psychedelics exploding in popularity, we need a stronger foundation, you know, to make sure that people are doing more good than harm. And so I love that, man. Very sound advice. And okay, guys, was that an amazing expose into some wildly fun realms or what? When Max reached out to me and I dove into his journey, I was immediately intrigued and knew I wanted to have the opportunity to feature him on the show. As many of you know, while psychedelics alone can have profound impacts in our lives, what I have found is that by combining them with modalities that can further allow us to integrate our experiences and allow our daily lives to become a psychedelic experience, we can create a more holistic experience from which to allow our experience of life to thrive from. And Max is a perfect example of how one may go about doing this with great success. For any of you looking to connect with Max, download his free ebook and or become an affiliate for his products, where you can offer those you serve a 10% discount on his Vitality salts and receive a 10% commission on each sale you make, along with the opportunity to make as much as a $2,500 commission on any float tank you sell using your coupon code. Make sure to check out the show notes for this episode, where we will be listing all of the ways to take action on those offers today. Max, thank you so much for doing the work you do in the world to help others heal through float therapy, for being a leading voice behind the ability to get high on your own supply of endogenous psychedelics, and for sharing your time, wisdom, and experiences with the listeners and me on the show today. And until next time, my brother, may your journey be smooth and full of light. Aho.